When Pam Bondi sat down for a routine TV interview, she had no idea the host had a plan to tear her apart on live television. But what happened next didn't just flip the script, it turned the entire industry on its head. Pam Bondi stepped into the studio, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The air was thick with the hum of last-minute preparations. Crew members rushed around, adjusting lights, fixing microphones, making sure everything was perfect. The cameras were already rolling, broadcasting the pre-show setup to millions of eager viewers. Pam took a deep breath, her face calm, but her mind sharp. Her eyes swept across the room until they landed on the host, who sat comfortably in her chair, her lips curled into a smug smile as she flipped through a stack of neatly typed notes. Pam knew that smile. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't welcoming. It was the look of someone who believed they had already won before the first word was even spoken. This wasn't just an ordinary interview. This was a setup, a planned attack, designed to trap her in her own words. The host had built her career on moments like these, catching guests off guard, twisting their statements, pushing them into tight corners until they either stumbled or surrendered. And once they did, she delivered the final blow, ensuring their downfall would be the headline the next morning. A young assistant, barely in her 20s, hurried up to Pam with a clipboard clutched to her chest. Her voice was polite but rushed. "Miss Bondi, we're going live in 3 minutes. The host will start with some questions about your career, just to warm things up." Pam gave a small nod, never taking her eyes off the host. She could already see the confidence in the woman's gaze, the belief that this interview would be like all the others before it. The host had no doubt in her mind that by the end of the night, Pam would be just another guest who walked away shaken, embarrassed, and wounded beyond repair. But Pam knew something the host didn't. With steady steps, she walked across the stage and took her seat. She sat tall, her back straight, her hands gently folded in her lap. The bright studio lights intensified, casting sharp shadows behind her. The low murmur of the audience faded into silence as anticipation filled the room. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail, her steady gaze, her composed expression, the quiet confidence in the way she held herself. The countdown began, and just like that, the show was live. The host lifted her head, her well-practiced smile spreading across her face as she looked directly into the camera. She had done this 1,000 times before. She knew exactly how to control the room, how to shape the conversation, how to lead her guests exactly where she wanted them. And tonight would be no different. With a sharp glint in her eye, she spoke the words she had been waiting to say. "Pam, some people say your legal career was built on privilege, that you didn't earn your success, that it was handed to you because of your connections. What do you say to those who think you're just another pretty face who got lucky in the right circles?" The audience chuckled. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was enough. Enough to let Pam know that they were already on the host's side. Enough to let the host know she had them right where she wanted them. She leaned back in her chair, completely at ease, her fingers lightly tapping against the armrest. She was satisfied. But Pam didn't flinch. She didn't blink, didn't shift in her seat, didn't let a single emotion cross her face that might suggest she was caught off guard. She had seen this tactic before. She had watched as others before her had stumbled over their words, tripping over rushed defenses, trying desperately to prove their worth in front of a crowd that had already made up its mind. She knew the game, and she had no intention of playing by the host's rules. Instead of reacting, Pam smiled. Not a forced smile, not a nervous one, but a slow, knowing smile, one that spread just enough to make the host pause. It was barely a second, but it was enough. A tiny flicker of hesitation, a crack in the armor. And that was all Pam needed. The audience was still chuckling, still thinking this was just another night of entertainment. Pam tilted her head slightly, her voice smooth, steady, and completely unshaken as she finally responded. "I say those people haven't done their homework," she said, her words deliberate, her tone calm but firm. "I built my career winning cases no one else could. I took on challenges others were too afraid to face. I exposed corruption when no one else had the courage to." She let the words hang in the air for a moment, the weight of them settling over the room. She could feel the shift, the subtle way the audience quieted, the way they leaned in just slightly, no longer as sure of what was coming next. Then she leaned forward, just enough to close the space between her and the host, just enough to make it clear that she wasn't here to be cornered. "And while we're on the subject," she continued, her voice taking on a sharper edge, "should we talk about your connections?" The host's smirk twitched. It was small, barely noticeable, but Pam caught it. And so did the audience, the way her body stiffened ever so slightly. The way her fingers gripped the chair just a little tighter. It was almost imperceptible. But in that split second, everything changed. The energy in the room shifted. Just seconds ago, the host had been in control. She had held the power. But now there was something else. A new dynamic, a different kind of tension. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. They were watching, waiting. And for the first time that night, the host wasn't leading the conversation. Pam was. The host forced a small, quick laugh, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. It was meant to sound casual, but there was something tight about it, something forced. She shifted slightly in her chair, trying to brush it off as if nothing had changed, as if she was still in control. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, her voice lighter than before, but just a little too careful. "This interview is about you." Pam didn't look away. She didn't let up. She simply tilted her head, studying the woman in front of her. Her expression was calm, unreadable, but there was something sharp behind her eyes. "Oh, I know," she said smoothly. "This is about me." She let a pause stretch between them before continuing. "But I do find it interesting how selective certain journalists can be when it comes to the truth." Pam continued, her voice unwavering. Her voice was steady, controlled, but the weight of her words filled the air. "Wouldn't you agree?" The host blinked. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but in the dead silence of the studio, it felt loud. The audience, who had been chuckling just moments ago, was now completely still, watching, waiting. The camera zoomed in, capturing every tiny flicker of emotion on the host's face, the slight tightening of her jaw, the way her fingers twitched ever so slightly, the way her once confident smile was beginning to falter, just a little. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't the one controlling the story, and Pam wasn't letting go. The host straightened her posture, trying to mask the unease creeping in. She lifted her chin, her practiced smile returning, but now it was different. A little too perfect, a little too tight. "Pam," she said, her voice carefully measured. "I'm here to ask the tough questions. That's my job." Pam nodded slowly, as if considering the words. "Of course," she said. "Tough questions are important." Another pause, another moment of quiet that stretched just a little too long. "But let's make sure we're asking the right ones." For the briefest second, a flicker of irritation crossed the host's face. It was gone as quickly as it came, but Pam caught it. So did the audience. The shift in the room was impossible to ignore. This was not what the host had expected. She had come into this interview prepared for something entirely different. She had expected Pam to be defensive, to squirm, to fumble over her words in an effort to explain herself, to try and fail to justify her career, her choices, her success. The host had been waiting for a single mistake, a single weak moment that could be turned into the perfect headline. But that wasn't happening. Pam wasn't playing along. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't flustered. She wasn't scrambling to protect herself. She was doing something far worse. She was taking control. Pam's voice remained unwavering, steady as ever. "Tell me," she said, her eyes locked onto the host's. "When was the last time you covered a politician's corruption without your network's approval?" The host's breath hitched, just barely. Pam leaned back slightly, her hands still resting calmly in her lap. "When was the last time you ran a story that didn't fit the exact narrative handed to you?" Her tone was light, almost casual, but there was nothing casual about what she was saying. Nothing casual about what was happening. Then she let the final blow land. "Or do you only ask tough questions when they serve a certain agenda?" The audience gasped. It was soft at first, a few scattered murmurs, then a ripple spreading across the room. The host's mouth opened slightly as if she was about to say something, then closed again. For a long moment, there was nothing, just silence. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. For years, the host had built a name for herself as the fearless interviewer, the one who asked the hard questions, the one who never backed down, the one who held the powerful accountable. But now she wasn't the one asking the questions. She was the one being questioned, and it was clear she wasn't prepared. She cleared her throat, shifting in her seat. "I think we're getting off topic," she said quickly, her words clipped, rushed. "This is about you, Pam." Pam didn't move. She didn't blink. She didn't even breathe differently. She just watched. Then finally she spoke. "That's convenient," she said simply. The words weren't loud, they weren't sharp, they weren't aggressive, but they cut like a knife. The host's fingers curled slightly on the desk, a small, almost imperceptible movement, but one that didn't go unnoticed. She was losing control, and the audience could feel it. The tension in the room was thick now, almost electric. And Pam, she wasn't done yet. The host's breathing was shallow now, uneven. The cameras, zoomed in tight, captured every tiny twitch of her fingers, every flicker of emotion she was trying so hard to hide. Her face, once so composed, was shifting, her mask slipping piece by piece. She wasn't just nervous, she was panicking. Her eyes darted toward the production team, searching for something, anything, some kind of intervention, some way to stop what was happening. But there was nothing. No cue cards, no scripted escape, no producer in her earpiece telling her how to regain control. The people behind the cameras were frozen, just as trapped as she was. And the audience? They weren't laughing anymore. No one was moving. No one was whispering. No one was scrolling on their phones or shifting in their seats. They were completely still, locked in, watching. Pam, on the other hand, was the opposite of nervous. She was calm, steady. She looked almost relaxed, but her words were sharp, precise, cutting through the silence like a blade. She tapped the document in front of her again, not loudly, not aggressively, just enough to make a point. "You're not denying it," she said. Her tone wasn't harsh, it wasn't loud, it wasn't confrontational, but it was final. And that, more than anything, made the host's chest tighten. The words hung in the air, heavy, impossible to ignore. Pam leaned back, giving the host space to respond. She wasn't in a rush. She didn't need to push. She already knew the answer. The host finally exhaled. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. She forced a smile, but it was weak, empty, lifeless. It didn't reach her eyes. It barely even moved her lips. "This isn't the place for this," she said. Her voice was too light, too forced, too rehearsed. "You're making wild accusations on live television." "You know what's funny?" Pam said, her voice as smooth as ever. "That's exactly what you do, except when you do it, it's called journalism." "So let's be journalists, shall we?" Pam continued, her voice unwavering. "Let's talk about why this memo exists." And then it happened. The host's mask cracked, just slightly, just for a second. But it was enough for everyone in the room to see it. Pam turned to the audience now, her expression unreadable, her voice firm and steady. "Every single person here," she said, "every single person watching at home deserves to know the truth." No one breathed, no one spoke. "And the truth is," she continued, pausing for just a moment, letting the tension stretch so tight it felt like the room itself might snap. "What you see on the news isn't always the whole story." The host's lips parted slightly, as if to interrupt, as if to protest, but Pam wasn't finished. "Not because reporters don't know it," she said, "but because they're told not to tell it." A low murmur spread through the audience, growing little by little like a quiet wave building before the crash. People shifted in their seats, their heads turning toward each other, whispering in hushed voices. Some leaned forward, their eyes locked on the stage. Others sat frozen, unsure of what they were witnessing. They weren't just watching a conversation, they were watching something unravel, a collapse happening in real time, a shift in power that no one had seen coming. The host must have felt it too, because she suddenly sat up straighter, as if pulling herself together, as if trying to regain her grip on the moment before it slipped away completely. Her hands smoothed over the desk in front of her, her fingers pressing down just a little too hard. She took a deep breath, forcing composure back into her voice. "Pam, let's be realistic," she said, her words carefully measured, her tone just a little too controlled. Every media company has guidelines. We can't just run stories without verifying information." She sounded reasonable, logical, like a professional trying to steer the conversation back on track, like someone who still believed she had control. Pam nodded slowly. "That's fair," she said, her voice as calm as ever. "But tell me—" She paused just for a second, just long enough. "When was the last time you verified something that didn't fit the narrative you were given? Or do you only dig deep when it benefits the right people?" It was subtle at first. A single clap, then another, then a few more. At first it was hesitant, cautious, unsure. Then it grew, louder, stronger, more certain. The host stiffened. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her fingers curled slightly against the desk. "This isn't a debate," she snapped, her voice sharper now, her patience cracking, her frustration bleeding through. Pam smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "It never is it?" she said softly. "Not when the questions are aimed at the wrong person." The applause came again, but this time it wasn't hesitant. It was strong. The host's face paled. A flicker of something crossed her expression, panic, disbelief, something else she couldn't quite hide. She was losing them. And Pam knew it. The camera zoomed in, catching every tiny movement, every nervous flicker of the host's eyes, every drop of sweat forming at her temple. She tried to stay composed, tried to keep her usual confidence, but it was slipping, fast. Her hands gripped the desk so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She was looking for a way out, but there wasn't one, not this time. Pam leaned forward just slightly, not aggressively, not in a way that seemed confrontational. Just enough to make the moment feel heavier, to make the distance between them feel smaller. Her expression remained calm, her voice soft, steady, almost gentle. "I don't need to say anything else," she said. And that was the truth. She didn't need to argue. She didn't need to press further. She didn't need to explain anything, because it was already done. "The people watching," she continued, her voice carrying through the silent studio. "They can decide for themselves." The host swallowed hard. She shifted in her seat, but there was nowhere to go. She had spent years shaping public perception, controlling narratives, making sure the audience saw only what she wanted them to see. But now, she was the one being watched, and there was nothing she could do to change that. Desperation flickered across her face as she turned quickly toward the teleprompter, hoping, praying, for some kind of scripted lifeline, something to pull her out of this. But there was nothing. The producers weren't helping. Maybe they wanted to. Maybe they were scrambling behind the scenes, whispering frantically into their headsets, trying to figure out how to regain control. But even they couldn't stop what was happening, because Pam Bondi had flipped the script, and the damage was already done. A sudden jingle filled the air. The screen behind them flashed. An emergency commercial break. The network had pulled the plug. The audience let out a collective gasp, murmurs rising from the crowd. People turned to one another, their faces a mix of shock, excitement, disbelief. Crew members rushed onto the stage, moving fast, whispering in hushed, frantic tones. The host shot up from her seat so abruptly that her chair nearly tipped over. With shaking hands, she reached for her microphone, yanking it off, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. She wasn't just flustered, she was furious. Pam, however, remained perfectly still. She didn't move, didn't rush, didn't scramble. The host stormed toward the side of the stage, her face tight with barely contained anger. She grabbed a producer's arm, whispering something harshly, urgently. But the cameras, still rolling, caught something else. Fear. Pam finally stood, smoothing out her blazer with practiced ease. Her movements were unhurried, controlled. "I assume we won't be continuing?" she asked, her voice carrying effortlessly through the tense studio. The host didn't respond. She was already gone. But Pam knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. By the time she walked out of the studio, her phone was already buzzing nonstop. The screen lit up again and again, a flood of notifications, missed calls, text messages coming in faster than she could read them. Social media was already on fire. Clips from the interview were spreading like wildfire, being shared, reshared, analyzed, dissected. Headlines were rolling in. "TV host gets exposed on live television." Pam Bondi turns interview into investigation. What else is the media hiding? The host, the network, the entire industry, they were all scrambling now. They were all on defense. And Pam? She was just getting started, because the truth had been set free, and there was no stopping it.